Assembly in Nairobi came to a close today. Delegates who include environment ministers, conservationists and business leaders discussed a host of issues. Sarah Kimani spoke to South Africa's Environment Minister Edna Molewa and CITES Secretary General John Scanlon about the Assembly and the upcoming CITES conference in Johannesburg this September. She began by asking Minister Molewa what South Africa's crucial submissions were and what they had expected to come out of the summit.
We do think that with the close to 20 agenda items that were here, resolutions that had to be agreed to, there are several that are quite important. And that, amongst others, is actually the issue of climate change. And in that regard, we do think that what had to be discussed here is not anything that's related to reversing what we agreed upon in Paris, but an implementation of Paris Agreement. And I think up to so far, there has been an agreement to that effect. We are moving forward with implementation. Second thing is the issue about the SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals. There was also just toing and froing, which finally came to an end. The SDGs issue is now being finally discussed. I think they are dotting the T's. If we are lucky, we'll have it. Probably not. It's one of the sticky issues, but it's just on one thing, really. We do agree that we need to go forward and implement that. One thing is the issue about money, means of implementation. So there are very important things for us, amongst others being the wildlife crime, not only management, because we were here to discuss the criminal and criminality within our wildlife, that in the species of fishery, in the timber, in all that goes with it. And those are the items that we are going to be dealing with in Johannesburg at the CITES conference. The parties have agreed on those as well. There's been some compromises made, particularly from South Africa's point of view. And Africa, by the way, it's the issue of sustainable use of our natural resources. So that concept has been agreed to, as it is embodied also in one of the SDGs, which we are really going to unpack further in a ministerial meeting that will sit just the day before the actual COP opens in Johannesburg. So we have invited ministers of environment of the world to come specifically to, at a strategic level, to have a discussion on how we embed and embody the issues of wildlife management in general and issues of separate ones about wildlife crime into the agenda of Sustainable Development Goals, which has got two goals that actually deals with this part.
Well, over the last 6 or 7 years, we've been experiencing a surge in illegal trade in wildlife, in particular as it affects the African elephant, the rhino, the pangolin, which is a small anteater. And what we've seen is this is happening at an industrial scale, not driven by local people for subsistence use, but driven by transnational organised criminal groups who are using very bad tactics. They're killing people, they're injuring people, they're corrupting people right along the illegal supply chain. And that's what's driving this illegal trade. So what we have to do is we have to use the same sorts of tools and techniques to combat these transnational organised criminals as we do to combat other serious crimes like illicit trafficking in drugs, trafficking in people, trafficking in firearms. That's what we're doing. That's why we are engaging with Interpol, UN Office of Drugs and Crime, the World Customs Organisation, to work with them to combat these transnational organised criminal gangs using the right tools and the right techniques. What's happened here this week? We've had a discussion around that. It's laying the path for Johannesburg. That is the main wildlife conference for 2016, the World Wildlife Conference at the fantastic Scanlon Convention Centre. It's going to be a great meeting. The world's going to convene there. We're going to resolve a lot of these issues.
Now, one of the things that has come up is that African countries may actually go there divided. There is an issue of trade in ivory and how they should go about it. Kenya says it will be seeking a complete ban in trade in ivory. Other countries feel there should be a leeway for a one-off sale of their stockpiles. Let us just discuss this and hear what each person feels and how should the countries move forward to Johannesburg. In your opinion, should there be one voice? Should people go to Johannesburg with one voice, and especially African countries, the ones that are worst hit by this wildlife crime?
Well, we have 182 parties or countries to the convention, and they've got a lot of different views on many different issues, not just African elephants, on all manner of issues. There are different views, and the beauty of this conference is you all come together to discuss those issues and work out the way forward. I think the thing we need to bear in mind first and foremost is there is one common objective, and that is the survival of wildlife. So we're all aiming for the same thing. There are some differing views about what's the best way to get there. And that's what we've seen in the preparation for the meeting, where there are some differing views about trade, no trade, that are on the table at the moment. They'll be discussed in the lead up to the conference, but we're all heading in the same direction. But we have a few issues to resolve between now and then. If not, they'll be resolved in Johannesburg.
Africa will be looking for you, will be looking up to you for leadership. Yeah. What would you tell them? Should they be worried? Should the African range states be worried that South Africa will let them down?
No, not really, because I think that we're coming at this as parties of the world, understanding very well that the 182 parties, each one of us actually has a role to play, and each one of us has a role to unite the world and to, in the final analysis, to conserve our species, our iconic species, as we all have to do. But with regards to the issue of African elephant and the proposal by Kenya, I must also report that indeed we do believe, we share the view with Kenya, that there is a need to engage way before COP17 of CITES in Johannesburg, so that there is at least a meeting of minds towards that meeting, so that we don't we don't end up being in that meeting with far divergent views, but having to try to understand one another, to explain to each other what could be the best approach towards this matter. So we are looking forward to that engagement. We have actually just engaged now, and we do think that this is a way forward that we have agreed upon. We may not be able to conclude our discussions here today, but we have offered to actually and agreed to actually go on and have several meetings, several engagements beyond today to actually find solutions.
Just still on wildlife, they're talking about 100,000 elephants killed on the continent between 2010 and 2012. In South Africa alone, more than 1,200 rhinos killed by poachers. The United Nations is also now thinking of sanctions, to deal with the big fishes, the kingpins, the people who are known to fund this business. Is that something that you would consider? They've already done it. Is it something you would bring forward to CITES? They have done it with armed groups in the DRC. They have done it with armed groups in the Central African Republic. Do you think that could be a deterrent?
Well, the main drivers of this illegal trade are transnational organised criminal groups. In some cases, rebel militia, but it's primarily driven by transnational organised criminals who are not necessarily in Africa, they're in other parts of the world. So we have the right tools and techniques to tackle these people. First and foremost, we have to treat wildlife crime as a serious crime, and that's defined under a convention that deals with transnational organised crime, 4 years imprisonment or more. So what we've seen is international community is agreeing that wildlife crime is no longer a low-level crime that doesn't need many resources or much attention. The impacts on people, the impacts on wildlife, the impacts on ecosystems are such, we have to treat it as serious crime. We have to find the kingpins, you have to prosecute them, you have to convict them, and you have to incarcerate them, take their resources, etc. Now that's already happening. South Africa's done that in terms of catching people and imprisoning them and taking their ill-gotten gains from them. But we need to do more, we need to do it harder, we need to do it faster. We are providing countries with the tools and techniques they need. The International Consortium on Combating Wildlife Crime, it's Interpol, CITES, Union Office of Drugs and Crime, World Customs Organisation, World Bank. We've provided guidelines on how to do forensics. How do you apply modern forensics to wildlife crime? And we're deploying teams in countries to assist. We've done an analytic toolkit so you can assess your whole criminal justice system to see where the gaps are in the system. And we're doing many other practical things with countries, with those in the front line to help them prosecute these serious crimes.
And yesterday you were talking about the international community must come on board to help African countries.
Absolutely, and indeed I do think that issue of dealing with the criminal elements is quite important. However, also from government side, different countries, we also have to do certain things that are really required to bring in a stop to this, poaching and so forth. For instance, amongst others, we had to look at, and as South Africa we did that, and we do believe that every country has got to do that, look at where there could be loopholes in our legal systems, where there could be leakages in the system, for instance, in the permitting system, your regulations and so forth in that regard. Our people are the most important pillars of this whole issue that we're talking about. Because if indeed our people do understand and are beneficiaries to the wildlife as they are right now, in a true sense of a word, we will have them participating lesser and lesser in being attracted by those who come from very far away, promising them lots of money or even giving them that money. They will be owners of whatever wildlife is there and be able to then for effort to protect that. So there's a set of other things that we also need to do. Not only rely on the law enforcement agencies part of it. Yes, it's quite important to have even this dealt with at a transnational level, because even if you deal with it as a country, you can't stop it. It has to be, that you have to deal with it at a multidimensional level, at international level, at countries level, and different law enforcement agencies like IQUIC that Mr. Scanlon was talking about right now. But these other sets of things has to be put in place. So measures have got to work together, all of them being unified and being pushed forward.
So come September, the world will be looking to South Africa and CITES to offer leadership on how does the continent move forward, and indeed how does the globe move forward in terms of curbing poaching, curbing trafficking of wildlife and wildlife products. Let us just get a feeling, the last word, what should we expect in September in Johannesburg? Mr. Scanlon.
It's going to be the largest conference of the parties of CITES in 43 years. We have 180 agenda items. That's the largest agenda we've ever had. We have extremely important issues dealing with sharks, dealing with rays, dealing with timber, dealing with pangolins, dealing with African grey parrot. There are a large number of species beyond the elephants and the rhinos we've been talking about that are going to be dealt with. For the first time, we have resolutions dealing with issues of corruption that haven't been dealt with through the convention before. So we've got a whole array of issues there. And on the enforcement side, we're going to look at enforcement, including combating corruption, but also local livelihoods, as the Minister has emphasised, how local people can have a stake in wildlife and benefit from it. And finally, the issue of demand reduction. How do you reduce the demand that is fueling this in the first place? Put it all together, as Minister said, in a transnational sense. So we're looking forward to an extraordinarily good meeting. We have a great host government, fantastic city, great venue. South Africa, the place to be, September 2016.
Minister, what should we expect? And please, as you wind up, touch on the issue of corruption, because one of the things that is being said is that in most countries, the reason it's very difficult to put anybody behind bars is because whether it's a magistrate, whether it's a police officer, whether it's a ranger, corruption still remains an issue as we wind up.
Indeed. I think we must say, let me start with this difficult one. The issue of corruption is quite real, and I think we need to deal with it. I mean, we in South Africa have arrested, amongst others, police, people from the Hawks themselves. We don't have to have mercy on such people, because what we see is actually part of a criminal element, and therefore corruption will be dealt with and eradicated as we do that and as we deal with people accordingly. Because otherwise, if we don't, then there will be just more and more coming into the system. But yes, what is it that we should expect in South Africa? We have been working very well with Mr. Scanlon and his team as a secretariat to prepare for this huge meeting. It's going to be an exciting meeting, a very long one, 2 week long, but it's going to be very busy every day, and there's going to be excursions. South Africans are ready to receive the entire community of the world on the shores of South Africa in Johannesburg at the Sandton Convention Center. We look forward to it.
Remember, it will not just be about wildlife, it will also be about how do we conserve our natural resources. For most African countries, and indeed for most countries of the world, animals, wildlife are considered as natural resources that earn economies and communities money. So looking forward to seeing you in September in Johannesburg. From Nairobi, it's goodbye.
Thank you.
Asante sana.
Asante sana.
Asante sana.